April the 11th, 2001. A small football ground in the coastal town of Coffs Harbour, New South Wales, Australia. The referee blows the final whistle, and the scoreboard tells a story that the world has never seen before and has never seen since. 31 goals in a single match in one afternoon. One man, striker Archie Thompson, scored 13 of them. 13 goals by himself in 90 minutes. Now here is what makes that record so fascinating. Most nations would frame it, put it on a poster, celebrate it as proof of greatness. Australia filed it away quietly. Because for most of their history, this was the whole story. A team that could destroy the smallest nations on the planet, but couldn't break through to the World Cup, couldn't get the world to take them seriously, couldn't get past the wall that stood between them and football's biggest stage. Till they could. This is the story of the Socceroos, Australia's national football team, their history, their legends, their current squad, and why the summer of 2026 may finally be the chapter where everything changes. Before we get into the drama, you need to understand something fundamental about Australia and football. Australia is one of the most sports-obsessed cultures on Earth. Cricket, rugby, swimming, athletics, tennis. Sport is not just entertainment there, it is national identity. It is how Australians define themselves to the world. But football, the version the rest of the world knows and breathes, always had to fight for a seat at that table. It was called soccer to separate it from rugby league. It was seen as the sport of immigrant communities, of Italian families, Greek families, Croatian families, Lebanese families who arrived with nothing, but brought their football culture with them and planted it in Australian soil. And ironically, that multicultural identity became the team's greatest strength. Look at a Socceroos squad today, and you see surnames from Serbia, Bosnia, Lebanon, and Burundi. Australia does not produce one type of footballer. It produces many. The nickname, Socceroos, arrived in 1967, when a journalist named Tony Horsted blended the words soccer and kangaroo, and the whole country simply adopted it overnight. The colors, green and gold, were borrowed directly from Australia's national flower, the golden wattle. Gold for the blossom, green for the leaves. On the badge, a kangaroo and an emu, two animals that physically cannot walk backwards, a football team that only ever moves forward. The problem for most of their history was that moving forward kept running into the same wall. And according to football folklore, that wall had a supernatural origin. The year was 1970. World Cup qualifications were underway, and Australian football folklore places the team in Rhodesia, the country we now call Zimbabwe. According to that legend, passed down through generations of players and coaches, the team hired a local witch doctor to curse their opponents before key matches. The ritual allegedly worked, but then the team refused to pay the agreed fee, and the witch doctor turned the curse around on Australia. Now, believe what you want about curses, but look at what followed. Australia did not qualify for a single World Cup for the next 32 years. 32 years! Entire generations of Australian footballers came and went without ever walking out onto that stage. Near misses. Heartbreaks in intercontinental playoffs, moments where they were close enough to touch the dream, and then it was gone. Till one night in November 2005 changed everything. Stadium Australia in Sydney, 82,000 people inside. Australia are playing Uruguay in an intercontinental playoff. Win this, and they go to the 2006 World Cup. Lose, and they wait another 4 years. The match ends level on aggregate. Penalties decide it. Goalkeeper Mark Schwarzer, who would go on to earn 109 caps for his country, a national record at the time, saved 2 spot kicks in the shootout. And then came the moment that Australia has never forgotten. John Aloisi, 12 meters from goal, the score at 3-2 in Australia's favor, but one more miss and it is over. He stepped up, he ran, he hit it into the top left corner and the goalkeeper never moved. 82,000 people exploded. Aloisi ripped off his shirt and ran toward the corner flag like a man who had just broken 32 years of chains. The curse, if it ever was one, was lifted. And what came next was the most celebrated chapter in the history of Australian football. June the 12th, 2006. Kaiserslautern, Germany. Australia's first World Cup in 32 years. They faced Japan in the group stage. Japan led 1-0 with 6 minutes remaining. Australia were staring at defeat in the most important match their generation had ever played. Then Tim Cahill arrived in the penalty area and headed the ball into the net, 1-1. A minute later, Cahill again, another header, 2-1. And in the final minute of the game, John Aloisi, the man from that Sydney night, sealed it at 3-1. 3 goals in 6 minutes, a comeback in the dying moments of their first World Cup match in over 3 decades. And those first 2 goals, the ones that started that comeback, were the first goals Australia had ever scored at a World Cup in their entire history. Both headers, both from the same man, both from Tim Cahill. Tim Cahill would go on to become the greatest scorer in Socceroos history. 108 appearances, 50 goals, 5 World Cup goals across 3 separate tournaments. But if one single moment defines what Cahill meant to Australian football, it came not in 2006, but in Brazil in 2014. Australia were playing the Netherlands. Arjen Robben had just scored. Australia were losing 1-0, 21 minutes into the game. A long ball came into the penalty area, high, dropping fast, over Cahill's shoulder at an impossible angle. FIFA named it one of the greatest goals in World Cup history. Arjen Robben, one of the finest players of his generation, said after the match that he simply could not stop watching it. And the FIFA president at the time, watching from the stands, later admitted publicly that he had never seen anything quite like it. That is the standard Tim Cahill set. That is the legacy this current squad has inherited. But Cahill was never the only name on that team sheet worth knowing. There was Harry Kewell, a left-footed winger from Sydney who became one of the most elegant players the Premier League had seen in the late 1990s and early 2000s. At Leeds United, he made 181 appearances and scored 45 goals, winning the PFA Young Player of the Year award in 2000 at just 21 years old. He moved to Liverpool, and in Istanbul in May 2005, the same year Aloisi sent Australia to the World Cup, Kewell was on the pitch as Liverpool came back from 3 goals down against AC Milan at halftime and won the Champions League on penalties. The greatest comeback in the history of European club football, and an Australian was part of it. 58 appearances for Australia, 17 goals. One of the most technically gifted players this country has ever produced. And that 2006 squad went all the way to the round of 16, where they met Italy in what remains the most heartbreaking match in Socceroos history. Italy had been reduced to 10 men in the 51st minute, after Marco Materazzi received a red card. Australia had a man advantage for almost 40 minutes. They were pushing for the goal that would send them to the quarterfinals. Everything was in their favor. Then, in the 93rd minute, deep into added time, Fabio Grosso went to ground under a challenge from Lucas Neal. The referee, Luis Medina Cantalejo, pointed to the penalty spot. Francesco Totti walked up slowly. He placed the ball. He exhaled. And he drove it into the top corner past Mark Schwarzer. Italy won 1-0. Australia were out. And Italy went on to win the 2006 World Cup. FIFA President Sepp Blatter later admitted publicly that the penalty decision had been a refereeing mistake and apologized to Australian fans. But apologies do not change results. The dream was over. And the pattern, though no one knew it yet, had just begun.
If you want more World Cup 2026 stories like this, not just predictions, but the history, pressure, and identity behind each team, subscribe to the channel. We are covering the nations that arrive with something real to prove.
16 years later, Qatar 2022. Australia qualified again, this time through a playoff that pushed their nerves to the absolute limit. But they made it. And once again, they pushed through the group stage. In the round of 16, they faced Argentina. Lionel Messi, the man most of the world had already decided would lift the trophy before the tournament even began. Messi scored in the 35th minute. Julian Alvarez added a second in the 57th. Australia were 2-0 down and facing elimination. Then in the 77th minute, Enzo Fernandez put the ball into his own net. 2-1. Australia were alive. The pressure was immense. The noise in the stadium became something else entirely. But the final whistle came at 2-1. Argentina advanced. And Argentina went on to win the 2022 World Cup. The second time Australia reached the knockout stage. The second time they were eliminated by the team that lifted the trophy. Italy 2006, Argentina 2022, world champions, both of them. The pattern was complete. Stop. Think about that for a moment. In the entire history of Australian football at the World Cup, they have reached the knockout stage exactly twice, and both times the team that eliminated them went on to win the whole tournament. The statistical probability of that happening twice by pure chance is remarkably small. There are 32 teams in the knockout rounds. The odds of facing the eventual champion in the round of 16, twice in a row, is not something you can easily explain away. You can call it coincidence. You can call it the witch doctor's curse that changed shape, no longer keeping Australia out of the World Cup, but making sure that when they arrive, they always end up facing the best team in the world on the worst possible day. But the question for the summer of 2026 is simple, and it is enormous. What happens when the eventual world champions are not in Australia's group? What happens when that path to the quarterfinals is clear? This Australia team heading to North America is different from anything that came before. The manager is Tony Popovic. He took over in September 2024 after a career building club teams on discipline, intensity, and collective belief. His Socceroos press high, defend compactly, and when they have the ball, they move. Under Popovic, Australia qualified for this World Cup directly. No playoffs, no two-legged nerve shredders in the rain. The verified record shows Australia ensured direct qualification for the first time since 2014, after a campaign that included wins over Japan and Saudi Arabia. For a team that had needed playoff rounds to reach the previous two World Cups, this was a statement. In goal stands Matthew Ryan, the captain. Born in New South Wales, currently playing for Levante in Spain. 103 caps for his country. A goalkeeper with years of top-level European experience and a long World Cup history with Australia. There was a point in his career where it looked like his international days might be over. He refused to accept that. He came back. And now he leads this team onto the biggest stage of his career. The spine of this squad was built in European football. Milos Degenek, born in Knin, raised in Germany, plays his club football for Apoel in Cyprus, and has worn the green and gold with pride for years. Jordan Boss lines up at left back for Feyenoord in the Netherlands, a defender developing in one of Europe's major football environments. In midfield, Riley McGree plays for Middlesbrough in the English Championship, and Connor Metcalf, playing for FC St. Pauli in Germany, brings energy and European club experience. Aydin Hrustic, Bosnian-Australian, plays for Heracles Almelo in the Dutch Eredivisie and adds another European-based option to the midfield. And then there is the name that connects the past to the future in the most extraordinary way imaginable. Nestory Irankunda was born in a refugee camp in Kigoma, Tanzania. His parents had fled civil unrest in Burundi with nothing but the determination to find somewhere safe for their family. They arrived in Perth, Western Australia, when Nestory was an infant. They later moved to Adelaide, South Australia, a city on the other side of the continent, where one of 7 siblings started kicking a football in local parks and community pitches. He was spotted playing for Adelaide Croatia Raiders as a 14-year-old by Adelaide United's head of youth development. He signed a professional contract at 15. He made his first team debut in the A-League at 16. At 17, he scored his first hat-trick and became the second youngest to do so in Australia men's history. Pace and explosiveness made coaches in Australia stop and look twice. And then Bayern Munich came to Adelaide. Bayern Munich, one of the 5 wealthiest and most powerful football clubs on the planet. They sent scouts to South Australia to watch a teenager who had grown up in a refugee camp. They liked what they saw, and in November 2023, they signed him for a transfer fee that broke the all-time record for any A-League player. In June 2024, at just 18 years and 123 days old, Irankunda became the second youngest scorer in the history of the Australian national team, a penalty against Palestine in World Cup qualifying. He left Bayern in the summer of 2025 to join Watford in the English Championship, a move that put him in a demanding league with the World Cup coming closer. From a refugee camp in Tanzania to a World Cup at 20 years old. That is not a marketing story. That is not a headline someone invented. That is the real life of a real person wearing the green and gold shirt into the biggest tournament on earth. You cannot tell this story without talking about the people who follow these players to the ends of the earth. The Green and Gold Army, Australia's traveling supporters, do not just watch football. They make football. They fly 20 hours from Sydney or Melbourne, land in a city they have never visited, find the nearest fan zone, and turn it green and gold before the first whistle blows. Their support has its own unmistakable rhythm. A leader shouts, "Aussie, Aussie, Aussie," and the crowd responds, "Oi, oi, oi," and it builds and builds until the entire section is one moving, breathing, roaring thing. And when the mood calls for it, Australian supporters have a soundtrack the world recognizes. Down Under by Men at Work, a song from 1981. I come from a land down under. It does not matter if you are from Brazil or Japan or Norway or Serbia, you know that song. You have always known it. And when it follows Australia at a World Cup, you sing along whether you plan to or not. For the Green and Gold Army, the 2026 route is clear. Vancouver on June the 13th, Seattle on June the 19th, Santa Clara on June the 25th. They will be the 12th man in every single stadium. Australia are placed in Group D at the 2026 World Cup alongside the United States, Paraguay, and Turkey. All three of their group matches take place on the west coast of North America. Their verified tournament base is in the Bay Area, accommodation in Berkeley, with training at the Oakland Roots Seoul facility in Alameda, perfectly positioned for the logistics of their travel schedule. Their opening match, June the 13th, is against Turkey at BC Place in Vancouver, Canada. A stadium in the heart of downtown Vancouver, surrounded by mountains, with floor-to-ceiling glass panels that let the outside world in. Turkey arrive with a highly talented generation, and both teams will know that 3 points here could define the entire group. June the 19th, Australia versus the United States. Lumen Field, Seattle. 70,000 seats, the host nation, the pressure cooker. Playing at home in front of their own fans with the weight of an entire nation watching. The kind of match that history remembers, because moments of individual courage in games like this become the clips people show their children 20 years later. And June the 25th, the final group game. Australia versus Paraguay at Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, the Bay Area, home ground for this tournament. A match where everything will still be possible and every second will count. Before they even reach Vancouver, Australia play their final warm-up match on May the 30th against Mexico at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, the famous stadium where the 1994 World Cup final was played. One last rehearsal in California before the real thing begins. This is the biggest World Cup in history. 48 teams, 104 matches, 39 days, 16 cities across 3 countries, and a new format that gives Australia more paths to the knockout stage than at any previous tournament. Because for the first time ever, 32 teams advance, including the 8 best third-placed finishers across all 12 groups. Let's end with a thought that no one can fully resolve. The witch doctor's curse lasted 32 years. John Aloisi broke it with 1 penalty in Sydney in November 2005. Since that night, Australia have been at every World Cup, every single one. The pattern that followed is one that football has never quite seen before. The only 2 times the Socceroos made it past the group stage, they were knocked out by the team that went on to lift the trophy. Italy in 2006, Argentina in 2022. Both world champions, both on the same side of the bracket as Australia. There is a 20-year-old at this World Cup who was born as a Burundian refugee in Tanzania. He plays in England now. Burundi showed interest, but he chose Australia. He chose the green and gold. And in June, he will stand in a stadium in Vancouver with the whole world watching, and nobody knows what happens next. Maybe the pattern breaks this summer. Maybe this is the tournament where Australia does not stand in front of the champions, but becomes one. Maybe Tony Popovic is the manager who finishes what that 2006 generation started. Maybe Matthew Ryan makes the save that nobody expected. Maybe Nestory Irankunda does something in Seattle or Santa Clara that people are still talking about in 30 years. Or maybe the pattern holds. Maybe the World Cup of 2026 produces another champion who had to go through Australia to get there. Either way, this is a story worth following, every single minute of it.
June the 13th, Vancouver, BC Place, Australia versus Turkey. The green and gold shirts, the kangaroo on the badge, the oi 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 chant filling the stadium. A kid from a refugee camp about to play on the biggest stage in football. That story starts in less than 2 months. And this channel will cover every moment of it, every match, every player, every turning point, every story that matters. Subscribe now, turn on your notifications, and come back because the next video is already waiting for you. The Socceroos are coming, and after everything they have been through, they deserve your attention.